Picture this: a sleek corporate boardroom, mahogany table gleaming under fluorescent lights, 20 suits discussing quarterly projections, when suddenly the door bursts open. But the person who walks in isn't supposed to be there. What happens next will completely shatter your assumptions about power, prejudice, and the corporate world. Stay with me, because this story has a twist that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about judging people by their appearance. Let me paint the scene for you. It's a Tuesday morning at Meridian Financial, one of those glass tower corporations where everyone speaks in buzzwords and measures success in profit margins. The executive boardroom sits on the 32nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of the city below. Around the polished conference table sit the usual suspects: department heads, regional managers, and senior executives, all perfectly groomed and impeccably dressed in their armor of expensive suits and designer accessories. The meeting had been scheduled for months. They were discussing the company's expansion into emerging markets, a project worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Charts and graphs filled multiple screens, spreadsheets projected quarterly forecasts, and leather portfolios lay open beside steaming cups of artisanal coffee. This was serious business, the kind where decisions made in this room would affect thousands of employees and countless investors. Marcus Wellington, the chief financial officer, was midway through his presentation about risk assessment when it happened. The heavy oak door to the boardroom, which should have been locked and guarded by security, suddenly swung open with enough force to make the paintings on the wall rattle slightly. Every head turned toward the interruption. What they saw completely defied their expectations and sent ripples of shock through the room. Standing in the doorway was a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, with wild curly hair that looked like she had just rolled out of bed. Her clothes told a story that seemed completely at odds with the pristine corporate environment. Faded jeans with holes at the knees, a wrinkled band t-shirt that had seen better days, and sneakers that appeared to have walked through puddles and construction sites. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of looking embarrassed or apologetic for the obvious mistake, she stood there with complete confidence, scanning the room with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail within seconds. She wasn't lost. She wasn't confused. She belonged there, even though everything about her appearance suggested otherwise. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. You could practically hear the collective thought bubble above the executives' heads. Who is this person, and how did security miss this obvious breach? Some reached for their phones, presumably to call building security. Others exchanged those meaningful glances that corporate executives perfect over years of boardroom politics. Marcus Wellington cleared his throat, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority mixed with barely concealed irritation that comes naturally to senior executives when their carefully orchestrated meetings are disrupted. "Excuse me, but I think you're lost. This is a private executive meeting and I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately." The woman smiled, but it wasn't the apologetic, embarrassed smile they expected. It was confident, almost amused, like she was enjoying a private joke that nobody else understood yet. "Actually," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Now the energy in the room shifted from surprise to concern. Several executives began reaching for their phones more urgently. Sarah Chen, the head of human resources, started mentally reviewing security protocols. James Morrison, the legal counsel, was already calculating potential liability issues. This was clearly some kind of security breach, or perhaps a disgruntled employee who had somehow bypassed multiple layers of access control. But then something unexpected happened. From the head of the table, where the CEO typically sat, came a slow, deliberate clapping. All eyes turned to see Richard Blackstone, the company's chief executive officer, applauding with what could only be described as genuine delight. His face wore an expression that nobody in that room had seen before: pure, unfiltered pride mixed with barely contained laughter. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard announced, his voice carrying across the stunned silence, I'd like you to meet Alexandra Blackstone, our new Director of Innovation and Digital Transformation. She also happens to be my daughter." The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. Jaws dropped. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. Smartphones that had been ready to dial security were slowly lowered back to the table. The perfectly composed corporate executives found themselves in the uncomfortable position of having to rapidly recalibrate everything they had assumed in the past 60 seconds. Alexandra stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind her with deliberate calm. Her father gestured to an empty chair at the table that had clearly been reserved for her, though nobody had made the connection until this moment. As she walked around the table, you could see the executives mentally replaying their initial reactions, probably wondering how badly they had embarrassed themselves and what this meant for their careers. But here's where Richard Blackstone showed exactly why he had built a multi-billion-dollar company from the ground up. Instead of pretending nothing had happened or glossing over the obvious discomfort in the room, he leaned back in his chair and addressed the elephant that was now doing cartwheels in the boardroom. "I can see some confused faces around this table," he said, his tone warm, but with an undercurrent of something sharper. "And I think this presents us with a perfect learning opportunity about the assumptions we make and how they affect our decision-making processes." Alexandra took her seat, pulling out what appeared to be a battered laptop covered in stickers from various tech conferences and programming languages. The contrast between her casual appearance and the formal setting was deliberate, you could see now. This wasn't an accident or a lapse in judgment. This was a carefully orchestrated moment designed to prove a point. Richard continued. 3 months ago, I announced that we were hiring a new Director of Innovation. I told you this person would be leading our digital transformation initiatives and helping us compete with tech startups that are disrupting our industry. I shared their credentials: MIT graduate, summa cum laude, published researcher in artificial intelligence, former senior developer at 3 major tech companies, and the creator of 2 successful startups that were acquired for a combined total of $47 million. The room was completely silent now. You could have heard a paperclip drop on the carpet. Every single person in this room was excited about bringing this talent on board, Richard said, his eyes moving deliberately from face to face around the table. You sent congratulatory emails. You talked about the fresh perspective they would bring. You scheduled meetings to discuss collaboration opportunities. Marcus, I believe you specifically mentioned being eager to learn about innovative financial technologies. Marcus Wellington's face had gone through several shades of red during this speech. He nodded slowly, clearly remembering his enthusiasm for the mysterious new hire's qualifications. "So here's my question," Richard said, leaning forward with laser focus. "What changed in the last 2 minutes?" Alexandra's credentials didn't disappear. Her experience didn't evaporate. Her intelligence didn't diminish. The only thing that changed was your visual assessment of her based on her appearance. Alexandra finally spoke up, her voice carrying a mixture of professionalism and barely contained amusement. "The T-shirt is from DEF CON, by the way. It's a cybersecurity conference. The holes in my jeans are from crawling around server rooms installing network infrastructure. And these sneakers have walked through more tech company offices than some of you have probably visited in your entire careers." The education was just beginning. Richard gestured to the presentation screens that still showed Marcus's risk assessment charts. "We've been talking about emerging markets and digital transformation like they're abstract concepts. But Alexandra here has lived in that world. She's not theoretical about innovation, she's practical about it." What happened next was perhaps the most powerful part of the entire encounter. Alexandra opened her laptop and began connecting it to the presentation system. Within minutes, she had pulled up a comprehensive analysis of Meridian Financial's current digital infrastructure, their competitive positioning in the fintech space, and a detailed roadmap for technological advancement that made Marcus's traditional risk assessment look like it was written with a quill pen. But she didn't present this information to humiliate anyone or prove her superiority. Instead, she began asking questions that showed she had already done extensive research on every person in that room. She knew Marcus's background in traditional finance and asked specifically how they could bridge old-school risk management with new-school predictive analytics. She addressed Sarah's concerns about employee adaptation to new technologies and outlined comprehensive training programs. She acknowledged James's legal expertise and asked for his input on regulatory compliance for innovative financial products. This was leadership in action, but it looked nothing like what most of the executives had expected leadership to look like. Richard watched this transformation with obvious satisfaction. His daughter wasn't just demonstrating her technical competence, she was showing emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, and the ability to unite a team around a common vision, all while wearing jeans with holes in them. "This is what we mean by unconscious bias," Richard explained during a brief pause in Alexandra's presentation. "It's not malicious. Nobody in this room woke up this morning planning to discriminate against someone. But we all carry mental shortcuts that help us process information quickly. The problem is when those shortcuts interfere with our ability to recognize talent and opportunity." The energy in the room had completely shifted. What started as confusion and concern had evolved into engagement and curiosity. Executives who had been reaching for their phones to call security were now taking notes and asking thoughtful questions about digital transformation strategies. Marcus Wellington, to his credit, was the first to directly acknowledge what had happened. "I owe you an apology, Alexandra," he said, his voice sincere. "I made assumptions based on appearance rather than focusing on substance. That's exactly the kind of thinking that's been holding our industry back from real innovation." This opened the floodgates for honest conversation about bias in corporate culture. Sarah Chen shared her experiences as one of the few women in senior leadership and how she had often been underestimated in similar ways. James Morrison talked about his own assumptions and how they had occasionally led to missed opportunities in legal strategy. But Alexandra's response to these admissions was what truly demonstrated her leadership potential. She didn't lecture anyone or make them feel worse about their initial reactions. Instead, she reframed the entire experience as a learning opportunity that could benefit the whole organization. "The thing about bias is that it goes both ways," she said, gesturing around the boardroom. "I walked in here making assumptions too. I assumed you would all be rigid, traditional thinkers who would resist innovation, but listening to your questions and seeing how quickly you've adapted your perspectives, I can tell that's not true. We all have preconceptions. The key is being willing to challenge them when we're presented with new information." Richard beamed with pride, but not just because his daughter was handling the situation with grace and intelligence. He was proud because this moment represented exactly the kind of cultural shift that Meridian Financial needed to stay competitive in a rapidly changing business landscape. "This is why we hired Alexandra," he explained. "Not just because of her technical expertise, though that's considerable. Not just because she's family, because she's not. She's earned this position entirely on her own merits. We hired her because she represents the future of business leadership, someone who can navigate multiple worlds, challenge conventional thinking, and unite diverse perspectives around innovative solutions." The meeting continued for another 2 hours, but it was completely different from the stiff, formal presentation that had been planned. Alexandra facilitated discussions about emerging technologies, market disruption, and strategic adaptation. More importantly, she created space for everyone to contribute their expertise, while acknowledging that the business world was changing faster than many traditional approaches could handle. The legal implications of blockchain technology, the human resources challenges of managing remote teams across multiple time zones, the financial considerations of investing in artificial intelligence infrastructure. By the time the meeting ended, several concrete initiatives had been outlined, cross-departmental collaborations had been planned, and the entire executive team had committed to participating in unconscious bias training that Alexandra would help design and implement. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the realization that innovation wasn't just about technology or strategy. It was about creating a culture where the best ideas could come from anywhere and anyone, regardless of how they looked or where they came from. As the executives filed out of the boardroom, many stopped to speak with Alexandra personally. They exchanged business cards, scheduled follow-up meetings, and expressed genuine enthusiasm for the collaborative projects they had discussed. The transformation was remarkable. What had begun as suspicion and concern had evolved into respect and excitement. Marcus Wellington lingered after the others had left. "I have to ask," he said to Alexandra, "was this whole thing planned? The casual clothes, the dramatic entrance, the timing?" Alexandra smiled and looked at her father. "Let's just say we wanted to create a memorable first impression that would lead to meaningful conversations about innovation and inclusion." Richard added, "Every new hire gets a traditional introduction, email announcements, meet and greet sessions, formal presentations about their background and responsibilities. But Alexandra suggested we try something different, something that would highlight the assumptions we make and how they affect our decision-making processes." "It was a risk," Alexandra admitted. "It could have backfired completely, but sometimes you have to be willing to disrupt the status quo if you want to create real change." The lesson here goes far beyond corporate boardrooms and family dynamics. It's about the stories we tell ourselves when we encounter something unexpected. It's about the mental shortcuts that help us navigate complex social situations, but can also blind us to opportunities and possibilities. Think about your own life for a moment. How many times have you made snap judgments based on appearance or first impressions? How many potential connections, collaborations, or friendships might you have missed because someone didn't fit your preconceived notions of what success, intelligence, or leadership should look like? This story also highlights something crucial about authentic leadership. Alexandra could have walked into that boardroom wearing a traditional business suit, armed with PowerPoint slides and speaking in corporate buzzwords. She would have been immediately accepted and respected based on her appearance and conventional presentation style. Instead, she chose to be authentic to who she was, while simultaneously challenging everyone else to examine their own biases and assumptions. That takes courage, confidence, and a deep understanding of human psychology. Richard's response was equally important. As the CEO, he could have simply introduced his daughter in a conventional way and avoided the uncomfortable moment entirely. Instead, he used the situation as a teaching opportunity that would benefit the entire organization's culture and effectiveness. The broader implications of this story extend into every aspect of modern society. We live in a world where first impressions are often made through social media profiles, video calls, and brief interactions. We make decisions about people's capabilities, trustworthiness, and potential based on limited information and unconscious biases. But here's what this story teaches us. The most valuable insights, innovations, and opportunities often come from unexpected sources. The person who can solve your biggest problem might not look like what you imagined. The next breakthrough idea might come from someone who doesn't fit traditional molds or expectations. This doesn't mean we should ignore qualifications, experience, or proven track records. Alexandra wasn't successful because she challenged appearances. She was successful because she combined authentic self-expression with genuine expertise and emotional intelligence. The real gold in this CEO's response wasn't just his pride in his daughter's accomplishments. It was his willingness to create a learning moment that would make his entire organization stronger, more inclusive, and more innovative. He recognized that the discomfort and surprise in that boardroom represented an opportunity to address unconscious biases that might be limiting their effectiveness in other areas. As you think about this story, consider how it might apply to your own situations, whether you're in corporate environments, academic settings, social situations, or community organizations. There are probably opportunities to challenge assumptions and create space for authentic expression and meaningful contribution. The next time someone walks into your metaphorical boardroom looking different from what you expected, remember Alexandra and Richard Blackstone. Remember that the most powerful innovations often come from the intersection of different worlds, perspectives, and approaches. And remember that true leadership isn't just about having the right credentials or wearing the right clothes. It's about the ability to unite people around shared goals while honoring their authentic selves and diverse contributions. This unwanted visitor didn't crash the boardroom after all. She transformed it.